All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Sébastien, and I'm the head of impact and sustainability at Glovo. So for those who don't know, Glovo is a multi-delivery category app. So we basically deliver anything to our customers in our cities. It's a digital marketplace. And in terms of sustainability, food waste is a key topic for us. I'd say for two reasons. The first one is that it's a major environmental concern. And we believe that as part of the food value chain, we have a role to play in reducing, food waste and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. And on the other side, it's also a massive business opportunity, and not just for Glovo, but for the entire ecosystem we're working with, restaurants, supermarkets, because less food loss, less food waste in their operations is better business for them. So today I'm with three people from the finance sector, three great speakers. We're going to share their perspective on food waste, on the food waste battle, and how to scale ambition in that sector. So we're going to start with a quick round of introduction. So if each of you can present yourself and explain, what's your contribution today to this food waste battle. So we'll start with Rob.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. It's also great to see so many folks around because when I started out in 2006 working with the Environmental Technologies Fund, we were one of the first sustainable investment funds in Europe. And frankly, I don't think you could have filled this room with the number of entrepreneurs, number of investors, and the number of business plans back in those days. So it's amazing how far this world has come that we're now embracing, companies that are doing things like tackling food waste, which is a very, very specific problem amongst the larger problems that are out there today. But my background was Silicon Valley. So I was Silicon Valley in the 90s. I came to Europe because I thought it'd be fun and exciting and a bit of a vacation. I spent 20 years on vacation helping entrepreneurs here, investing money for the government of Singapore, JP Morgan, before setting up an impact-related fund. We're now on to our fourth fund, and everything we do is all about achieving both a commercial return and having an impact. And I think tackling food waste is one of the biggest problems out there, so looking forward to talking about that today.
Yeah, thanks, Sébastien. Thanks, Rob. Hi, everyone. I'm Peter. I'm part of the investment team of Vorwerk Ventures, a Berlin-based venture capital fund with focus on consumer-enabling tech, meaning we are focusing on anything that is really touching the end consumer and therefore also tackling the food waste problem as food or food tech as one of our big buckets from that perspective. And have been active in the space since the inception of our first fund in 2007. In the beginning, more from the commercial side, new, innovative, and more efficient and sustainable ways of selling groceries. Also, since our third fund generation, 2018-19, more from the perspective of new, innovative ways of producing food. So the alternative food space, functional ingredients, infrastructure, new ways of production, and everything related to that. Awesome to be here today with this great panel.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrés. I'm from Venezuela originally. I live in Miami, and I'm a managing director of Arpegio. We're an early-stage VC fund investing in tech startups that add value at any point of the supply chain of food. So we see anything from farm to table. We also invest or look for startups worldwide, but that are looking to expand into Latin America as a market. That's the market where we have most contacts, connections, and we have built a strong network of stakeholders related with the industry, and that's a way we can add value to our portfolio.
Great, thank you. So if we look at the food value chain, right? Food waste can happen at any stage, from production to consumption, no? At any stage of the value chain. So I was curious about your opinion on actually what stage of the value chain is the most interesting. What stage has the biggest potential when it comes to reduction of food waste?
I mean, I can jump in here right now since as we're focusing on the consumer end, I think a lot of the food waste or a big chunk of the food waste is created at consumption at the end consumer, meaning at our homes or at restaurants, for example, and therefore I think it's a huge challenge to tackle that, especially since it's a very, very fragmented market to address single households tackling that issue, and here also especially considering how we treat food in our Western world. We kind of like take it as given, and it's going to be interesting how this is in other markets. It's also a cultural problem from my perspective, that we really start to value food and start to really utilize everything that we buy in terms of groceries at home, and making our home consumption way more efficient than it is today.
I was going to say something before we maybe tackle the very specific issues of where we can make a difference. Al Gore does a great job of pointing out why we're here today, why we're actually trying to make a difference. And he's able to, I think, make it emotive, bring it close to home. And so, we always talk about maybe 1/3 of food is wasted. That's a huge number, okay? But nobody really can appreciate that. But if you look at the United States, I saw, that's equal to the amount of food that's produced in California and New York combined. And California, of course, is one of our largest agricultural states in the United States. That food is wasted. That's a huge amount of food that is going to landfill. I think 95% goes to landfill. And that's something to reflect on. So before you start even picking apart the pieces where we can make a difference, you have to realize it's a huge problem that we're addressing. Sorry.
And to add to that, Rob, there's also a statistic that if food waste was a country, it will be the third emitter of greenhouse gases. So food waste is not only the food that you're wasting, but the problems it causes after, so in emission of methane and other gases, but also thinking about all the resources that were used to produce that food that's going to waste. You have water, you have land, soil, transportation, logistics. So it's a bigger problem also than just the food. And to your question, Sébastien, for us, for Latin America, the part of the supply chain that it's mostly affected or most affected by food waste is the production part. Latin America is a big producer and exporter, so that's where a lot of the efforts that we're seeing or opportunities that we're seeing in the market now, but also it's driven by over-consumption or overstocking from the US too. So in the US, I think most waste comes from the retail part. Latin America, it's more on the producer part of the supply chain. And I recently read a statistic that in the UK, it's more from the home owner. So it depends also on the geography that you're focusing in, how culturally or where is the most production or waste being waste.
I think we agreed we're going to make this interactive, so we'll just keep going back and forth a little bit here. It's really good that you mentioned climate change or the climate emergency, right? We need solutions today. So it's not just where can you have the biggest impact, whereas we as investors can make the most money, but where can we do it today? And one of the things that I was listening to as I was hearing the earlier panels about some of the investments in alternative proteins and the like, the question is, when does that come to market? When does that start to have an impact? And I, as an impact fund, want to see impact today. So I quite often reach to digital solutions because a digital solution can be deployed quite quickly, not with a lot of capital. And guess what? By fixing somebody's logistics or maybe changing somebody's frame of mind about how they treat waste, we can have an impact right now. And I don't have to worry about, I think somebody was talking about a 15-year backlog in terms of fermentation equipment, which I didn't quite understand because I would have thought an entrepreneur would fix that. But let's go find solutions today that can have an impact.
And Rob, is there, according to you, is there any gap today in these value chains in terms of the solutions that exist?
Well, I think what happens is you see solutions start to pop up, perk up in certain parts of the world, and the question is how quickly can they expand? So we have an investment in a really neat company called Phoenix, which is the software that allows the very big hypermarchés, the Carrefours of this world, to take their food just before it goes off and make sure it ends up in the hands with people that need it. So poor people or people that are going to buy just before it goes off product, or waste-to-energy plants, or even farmers, et cetera. They can make use of that. And the French government's done a great thing, which is they put the right legislation in place to put the tax breaks in there. The question then is, how quickly will the rest of the world copy, right? How quickly will Europe adopt that? How quickly will the United States start to push it? And so it's not so much gaps. I think we see good ideas, but we need to really push the best ideas forward for there to be great success.
And to add that it's part of the conversation we were having before, it's that incentive from the French government has what incentivize also investors to look this as an opportunity, because there's money to be saved or made. There's money on the table. We've seen similar solutions in Brazil, but when we talk with corporates or retailers, they don't want to adopt it, or they don't see the incentive because there's no that tax law there. So again, the gaps can be also the incentive to make the right decisions, and most of the time it comes where there's money to be made. So starting to see this as a business opportunity.
So maybe, Peter, on the consumer side, what kind of incentives are lacking today?
I mean, for me, as a German investor and really I'm confident with the German market, I would say a huge lack is that we have wrong incentivization in the market, especially in terms of grocery prices. From my point of view, groceries are heavily subsidized, or the old incumbent industries are extremely subsidized, especially in Germany. We have been culturally used to extremely cheap grocery prices for a long time these days. And therefore, this is tackling the issue I mentioned earlier. The way we value groceries or food is not really the same as in other geographies, if you think about it on a global scale. And I think this is really an issue we have to tackle. And on the other hand, we need some kind of like governmental support on pushing forward new solutions on making, for example, groceries available that pass the best buy date for the overall consumption, not only to give it away to poor people or people who wouldn't be able to afford it, but also into the general households as well, and make that acceptable for everyone. And especially right now, I think it's a good timing in terms of that, as we are in a very specific macroeconomic environment in terms of inflation, for example, where grocery prices are rising, and now could be really good timing to step into that gap and make groceries widely available, even if they pass the best buy date, and make that a common thing in society, rather than keep buying stuff in packages, and then we all know that issue. After a week, we throw half of our grocery stock in our fridge away, and this is really an issue. And this is also what we experienced when we were one of the early investors in HelloFresh in 2013, when there was just a team and the idea. And what we saw is really that the families, especially, which HelloFresh are targeting, really appreciated that they get the exact packaging sizes of food and groceries, that they really utilizing the whole package they get, and after they're done cooking the recipe and feeding everyone at home, basically everything was done, the fridge was empty, and everyone was happy. And we really saw that being a huge impact. And we have to push that more into the public knowledge, from my perspective, especially in Western Europe.
Yeah, that's a good example, because HelloFresh is probably driven by convenience first, and one of the co-benefits is actually the reduction of food waste. So, is food waste a purely impact topic, or what examples of companies do you have in mind that actually managed to build a business case for it and to scale?
So, in our case, we invested in one called Safe Fruit. It's a biotech company that developed a gas that it's put into the fruit or vegetable, and it extends its life. So it's no coating, 100% natural, and it's a real solution solving a real problem. It's easy to set up in the facilities, in the production facilities, and it not only has an impact, as you can see it, in less fruit or fruit being able to be eaten for more time for logistic and transportation issue. They also did a test, for example, with the papaya that is usually flown from Mexico to Russia as an export, and now they were able to do it on my ship. So there is a carbon footprint there from that papaya being able to be exported now on a plane. So that's a useful case. And another one related to consumers, it's one startup in Mexico that give rebates to consumers if they buy soon to expire items. And that's an interesting, super interesting idea. There's an economic incentive for the buyers. One of the hurdles they've been having is education. You need to educate the consumers to use it, and even if they're saving cents, that now with inflation it adds up. It's still there's an education gap of people wanting to or willing to buy soon to expire, but the business model makes sense.
Yeah, there's another one in the UK, which is slightly different than the HelloFresh model, called the Modern Milkman. And what they're doing is bringing your subscription-based groceries to your door. But what the consumer quickly figures out is they only order what they need because they know it's coming next week. And so they don't overstock. The other thing that they're doing, of course, is bringing all their produce and goods in recyclable packaging and increasingly in electric trucks. So, you know, we would say the consumer doesn't want to pay a premium for sustainability, but is very, very happy when those goods show up in, if you would, sustainable packaging on an electric truck. So you have to figure out how to balance that at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really good point. As for us as a consumer investor, obviously pricing is a huge issue these days. I mean, ultimately, when we all go to the supermarket, the first thing we're looking at is the price, right? And today, still, I think the sustainability aspect is kind of like, it's good, and consumers are recognizing it, but it's more a nice to have than really a must have at this point. And therefore, I think we really have to push from the other side, us as investors, but also governmental actions to really push that into the broader society. And then maybe then also some other examples in terms of, from the consumer perspective, that I find interesting. For example, in Europe, from Stockholm, Matsmart, or now Potatoes, very interesting, selling groceries that are via the internet that are close to the best buy date, and obviously then with a discount. And we looked at them, I think, since 2018, never really believed that they will be able to make it, especially next to all those cheap discounters in Germany, the Lidls and Aldis of this world. But until today, they proved us wrong, and they're doing a really great job. And I think here also it's about timing in the current macroeconomic situation. They really have a great place. But then also, if you go deeper into the value chain, it's quite interesting to see in the conventional food production industry, there are a lot of side and waste streams that are not utilized today, or maybe even for the cattle industry, which is not the most sustainable industry, as we all know, and really to upcycle those waste and side streams to create new innovative and healthy products is also kind of interesting. And we see a couple of those companies currently coming up in Europe and all over the world. And I think this is also really important to start basically recycling food and waste streams at the beginning of the value chain already.
You know, I think you made also a very interesting point there, that sustainability and health are often interwoven, and it's sometimes hard to tell why somebody's buying something. But the advent, for example, of alternatives to dairy, like your oat milk, for example, I mean, that's an example of the consumer saying, wow, this is probably better for me, and it's helping to save the world, right? Obviously, the producer likes it because they make a heck of a lot more margin off of selling that versus your traditional dairy product.
And also the point you made on the upcycling, it's very interesting. We see in corporates, I think in Europe it's more established, but now in Latin America, more interested in using byproduct, ideally to put it back into their chain, rather than having to create a byproduct, and if they sell bread, now they have to sell feedstock, which is not part of their business, but that's a plus if they do it. But if not, it's also helping, but also seen in another perspective. For example, cacao or cocoa, you can use the shell to create biochar. And that's helping small farmers have a different additional source of income by using the waste that they just harvest in the cacao. So there's ways of incentivizing the use of waste or upcycling on other parts to make incentivize users to do it, or corporates to create new revenue streams.
And I also think a good example in terms of like consumer-facing sustainable models, the financing round I just saw lately is Mill from the US, who raised, I think, a 100 million round from lower carbon and others from the scratch. Kind of interesting. And that's actually a smart bin for private households where you throw your food waste into it, and overnight it's basically digesting the food waste and is creating feed for chicken, and then you can send it from your home to the chicken farm and they can use it again, and then you get your eggs from the chicken farm in return, which is a kind of interesting circular economy model pretty difficult to scale, and we'll get to that point, I guess. But a super interesting model from my point of view, from the consumer perspective.
I was just thinking about what haven't we touched on. One thing we haven't talked about is data. There's much more data than ever before, thanks to cheap computing and connectivity. And now you can start to make systems-wide decision based on what's happening to food as it goes down, if you would, the supply chain. And so if somebody's not purchasing it at the end, you don't have to produce it. Seems kind of obvious. But those systems weren't in place for a long time. And I think you're going to see a much more holistic approach to, if you would, the cycle of food as it moves along. And that's going to take a lot of waste out, and that's going to also be an interesting place to invest.
Actually, this is a point, a super interesting point, and I was going to ask, because so we have two speakers here that goes more from the traditional investment background, and Rob, you're more in the impact investing sphere. So one important thing here is to be able to measure the impact that these businesses are having. So are you looking at impact measurement on your side, and how does it look like? Because this is key if you really want to scale.
Absolutely. I think people that give us money want to see impact as well as return. So I have to measure it, I have to monitor it. In fact, if I don't deliver it, I give back some of my carry. So it's really important to get that side of it right. I think when I was in Silicon Valley, I used to always tell the startups, focus, focus, focus. In some respects, that's also true when it comes to impact measurement. Focus on a few key indicators. Don't try to do everything through some really complicated, weird analysis, right? And so if you took, for example, the Phoenix story that I shared, how much food are we stopping going to landfill? We can demonstrate that. We can show that. If somebody then wants to make a carbon calculation off of it, that's fine. But let's start with the basics. How many tons did we avoid going to landfill? And that tells a great story. Sure, I can talk about some of the other effects that the company is having, but the simple story sometimes resonates the best.
I think we, as more generalistic funds, can really learn from that, as we are not I would say, an impact investor by heart. Nevertheless, we're still following, let's call it the conscious consumer. And as already mentioned, I mean, sustainability is in the head of the consumer, and it is to some extent important to the consumer. And therefore, we would measure it more from a consumer perspective. How big is the consumer acceptance in that given field for that sustainable solutions, and can we find that that compromise of the price point, the product quality, and sustainability, and this is very, very difficult to find.
And in our case, we're similar. We're a finance-first fund, but we always make sure that the entrepreneurs are aware of it. I really like what Rob mentioned. Even if you're even a later stage investor, we work with seed or even pre-seed startups, and they just need to figure out their product market fit. So trying to push, measuring all the impact measurements, it's gonna be it's gonna drown them, you know. So, but we do try to make them aware of them. Choose maybe one in the beginning, because our tools are all gonna help them along the way in future fundraising rounds.
And is this impact a way for companies to fundraise more? Are there some investments that are available based on impact?
Well, it wasn't me, but I'll take some credit for it because I'll repeat it. But somebody once said, "Who wants to buy the unsustainable company?" And there's a lot to that. I think all the stakeholders, be they customers, employees, partners, people that are doing scope 3 emissions because you're in their supply chain, everybody's going to be looking very seriously at what you're doing at the end of the day. And the one thing I want to leave you with is that growth and impact can go together. So there used to be a belief you were trading something off, okay, by doing something positive for the world. In fact, these two things can go together, and that's the most compelling thing that I can do.
What we're seeing is it's becoming every more a requirement. No, so for later stage investors, they're requiring you to be having your measurements, diversity, many of the sustainability or development goals measure or become a big corp, things like that. So it's becoming the norm slowly, but it's going to it's happening.
Yeah, and I also think that it is very important that funds, Rob, and funds like ETF Partners are paving the way very early on for the more generalistic peer group, as I think it will also be very, very important to implement some kind of KPIs or benchmarks that are used over the whole industry. I mean, I'm also talking to a lot of impact funds, and I always ask them, how do you measure impact? What does sustainability mean to them? And they always have different ways of measuring it, and I always feel like it's also very important that we find some kind of alignment how to approach those investments. Obviously, it depends always on stage, as you mentioned, Andrés, but we also need some kind of like benchmarks in the investment industry, and this is still lacking from my point of view, and I hope this will evolve as the whole space is obviously growing.
So you mentioned several examples of companies you're investing in. And to go back to the topic of the conversation now, is enough capital being allocated to these companies? So is there enough? And what are we missing to unlock more capital? Because I guess the answer is no, there is not enough, and this company need more support to grow.
Yeah, so no, I don't think there's enough, but it's growing. So I think in the last couple of years was 2 billion allocated. So it's becoming a sector, becoming an interesting place to going from philanthropy or maybe just wanting to do to a business opportunity. And I think that's one of a big shift that's increasing the attention into this, plus also having the ecological or the sustainability part, so which is now it's part of a lot of investment thesis. So, but we need legislation. We talked it before. There has to come hand in hand with legislation, or we need corporates to adopt this type of incentive or incentivize their value chain to adopt food waste strategies. So, like demand planning and things like that. So it's increasing. It's not there yet, but there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, and 100% agree that we need more governmental support on that end and policies. What I'm also wondering sometimes is if we have the right tools as a venture capital industry, as most of us have fund timelines, usually 10 plus 2 years. And a lot of those food waste plays, they take a lot of time to involve, take a lot of time to have impact. Obviously, Rob mentioned earlier that he's also likes to look at those plays who have initial impact and therefore more kind of like the asset light plays, if I understood correctly. But I also think there needs to be something to touch new ways of production. I don't know, a super smart bin, as I just explained earlier, and those companies developing hardware, developing new ways of production, developing new side streams, new biotechnological processes. This really takes some time, and therefore, yeah, I'm just raising a question if a 10 plus 2 year fund timeline is enough to really support those businesses in the long term, and not just in the mid and short term. And I think this is really an issue, and I think we also need their capital, more long-term capital, some kind of like evergreen structure that is really able to support those businesses really along the way until the end.
I'm going to mix my metaphors here, in that I'm going to say there's a massive wave for sustainable investing, and this area will receive its fair portion of the capital. The flip side is the seas are very choppy right now, because I think there are a lot of people that raised money, that went through that money over the last couple of years, that are hurting right now. There are a number of companies probably in the same bunch, in the same category. And it's not easy for new funds to raise money in today's climate because of what's happening in the global economy. So I think it's actually a challenging time for the next couple of quarters, but the macro sort of up and to the right looks very good for this area.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, I think this is a huge challenge as obviously the macroeconomic situation and the investment environment cooled down in the last couple of months / the last year. And a lot of those companies are also not yet revenue generating, right? They're really tech relying, focusing on their tech, and will generate revenues in the upcoming years. So it will be a really tough time for them raising funds and keeping their burn rate down, obviously, as of now.
They always used to say the best companies were created in times like these.
So yeah, we spoke about policy incentives, innovation, data. So we still in the beginning. And just like to close this panel, I just wanted to ask you a question. So what solution do you imagine could provoke a step change in this area, in the food waste area?
Do I get to go last?
No, I can go ahead. I think something we have so far neglected also in that panel right now, and which is really attached to food waste, or is even food waste for me, is the issue of packaging, because most of processed food or even the natural food has to be packaged, and we really need to find solutions there, not only circular economy solutions, but really biodegradable solutions for packaging. And I think this is a huge issue that is attached to the whole food waste value chain. And then if you look at the pricing, for example, if you even start just with recycled plastic, which is more expensive than buying new plastic, this is a huge issue from my perspective. And I really would love to see more companies tackling the whole packaging issue on a global scale.
I think the time is up, but I'll just add a couple of things that we're seeing. Demand planning that we touch. I think we've seen real companies use it, and they're reducing to 3% the waste of their agricultural produce, and also related with packaging traceability or sensors for packaging that can start giving or providing us more data and information on all the process or all the chain that one product goes through.
So I was just going to say something really provocative. Remember, I invest in the here and now, but I like to think way out in the future. And I was reading a report that said 50% of all dairy cows are going to be off the land by 2030. And 70% of milk production is not going to come from those cows anymore. And that's pretty wild when you reflect on that. And the report went on to say by 2035, a third of the United States farmland is going to be used for something else. So if you actually believe all that, which is not impossible, this whole chain that we're working so hard to perfect is going to change under our feet, which is pretty wild.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Andrés, Peter, Rob, for this panel. So yeah.
And thank you, Sébastien, for chairing it. Applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.